Dave Talks Comics, Episode 116, Heroes Con 2016, Part 4. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, the program where I talk about comic books, cartoons, and comic book conventions. Most episodes are a mix of summary and opinion and include spoilers. Please keep that in mind. Spoilers. Or spoilers. All past episodes can be streamed or downloaded from the program's website, davetalkscomics.com. This episode continues my coverage of Heroes Con 2016. I will be talking about my experiences on Sunday, the third and final day of the convention. The panels I went to, the things I bought, and so on and so forth. You can find my blog posts on Heroes Con 2011 and 2012 and podcasts on Heroes Con 2014 and 2015 at davetalkscomics.com. Look for the name Heroes Con in the convention section on the right-hand side of the page and click it. You might have to scroll down a little bit to find it. I think I'm done with Heroes Con for this year, or at least done at the convention center for this year. Right now it's about 3:25 on Sunday afternoon. I left the convention center about 50 minutes ago. My day began with breakfast at the hotel, once again. Had eggs, bagel, and juice. Bagel wasn't much, but it was bread. And I'd had toast one day and an English muffin another day, so I figured why not try a bagel. It was pretty small, and I mean, it wasn't awful, but it wasn't that impressive either. After breakfast, I packed things up. I got ready to go, and around 9 o'clock, I packed up the car, checked out of the hotel, and left. Now that the convention, the con didn't open until 11 o'clock, but I had decided to go to a supermarket, so I found a Trader Joe's that's near the downtown area. And so I drove there, and it was basically on my way in, just a little bit out of my way, but basically on my way in. So I went there. I ended up looking around there for quite a while, unable to find what I wanted. I finally did. It was like in the one corner where I wasn't looking. What I wanted was some more chicken, because I had some tomatoes and some cucumbers left over, and I wanted some chicken to go with that. And I figured I'd also buy some more pita bread, and I could have that as a meal sometime this afternoon. So I did that, and I bought that stuff, and then I was also looking for something else to nibble on for, kind of a snack, but I didn't really find anything that I wanted there. So my plan was to go to maybe find something downtown near the park, near the convention center. So I'm in a parking garage, which is where I'm at right now, where I parked the car, I think last year or maybe the year before I parked here. It's only $5, and it's right across the street from the convention center. Very convenient. Let's see, what else did I do? Oh, so then I went up the street, up College Avenue, to Broiger's Bagels. And, their bagels weren't that much more impressive than the bagels that I had at the hotel. In this case, it was what kind of bagel was it? It was a cinnamon raisin bagel with butter on it, which is the way I usually like to eat them. And it was okay. Once again, it was a little more tasty because it had cinnamon and raisins. But it still wasn't all that great. Now, when I was leaving there, it was up on the second flight, up on the second level. I had to walk downstairs. When I walked downstairs, something caught my eye, and I looked down, and I noticed my fly was open. And, well, my fly had been open for quite a while, at least since I left the hotel. So now a number of things started to make sense, like the stink eye that the cashier at the Trader Joe's was giving me when I was waiting in line. And I was wondering why he was looking at me so strange, but I never thought to look down, and he never said anything. And I may have gotten a few strange looks from other people as well. It's not like, it was obvious that my fly wasn't zipped up all the way, but it's not like anything was hanging out, or you could even see my underwear. But it was a little embarrassing. But there wasn't anybody there on the steps when I spotted it, so I was able to zip it up without embarrassing myself further. I was still a little hungry, so I went by Amelie's Bakery, thinking that maybe I would get something there, something I could take with me into the convention center, a pastry or something. And then I saw the line, which was probably 30 or 40 people deep, and I decided, no, I don't think so. I'm not going to wait here. I had a short wait for the, a short wait for at Brugger's Bagels, but it wasn't anything like that. I mean, it was like 3 or 4 people in line in front of me. And, I made it through that line in like 5 minutes. I assume it would have probably taken considerably longer than that at Amelie's Bakery. I assume that the reason why that place is so popular is because it's almost right across the street from the convention center. It's just slightly up the block. Or across the street and up the block, something like that. I went back to the car. I got my stuff. I went over to the convention center. By now, it was getting close to 11. It was about 20 of 11, 25 of. I didn't feel like standing in line, so I found a place to sit down. And I pulled out my tablet, and I finished off the issue of Avengers, number 93, which I had started to read on the first day, on Friday, the first day of the convention, when I was waiting in line. And that's the first issue that Neil Adams drew of, I don't know if it's the very first issue that he drew of Avengers, but it's the first issue he certainly drew in the Kree-Skrull War. Probably was the first issue he drew of Avengers. Once the con opened, I went downstairs. I did some more looking around. I looked for magazines. I found some dealers who had some magazines, comic book magazines. I was really looking for fanzines. And so I looked for fanzines. I found some. Some of them were much more than I wanted to pay, and really none of them were specifically focused on things that I wanted. I recently bought a bunch of issues of a fanzine called Comics Feature, I think. I think that's what it was. And so I was just thinking maybe I could find some more. I didn't do an exhaustive search for it, but the dealers whose tables I stopped at either primarily had comic book magazines, so in other words, things like Planet of the Apes and is it Savage Hulk or something like that? And, some of those other magazines, I usually think of them as being more Marvel. I don't think DC did very many of those kinds of magazines. They also, there's also some of those tabloid-sized things that, like for the movie tie-ins, like Indiana Jones or Alien, things like that. But quite often they wanted more than I was ever even willing to pay, and I wasn't really interested in buying comic book magazines like those. So in the end, I didn't buy anything in that period of time that I was down on the floor. I just did a lot of looking. I think I saw a few things comic book wise that interested me, but they were just a little more than I wanted to pay, or they were in a little worse condition than what I wanted, and they just weren't things that I really wanted or felt the need to buy, and I felt like I'd bought quite a bit already. So at noon, or a little before noon, I went upstairs to the crime panel. And I will talk about that in a separate recording, but that'll be part of this episode. And after the crime panel, which ran from 12 to 1, I went back downstairs to do a little more bin diving. Now, this time I did buy some stuff. I found a dealer who had 50-cent boxes. Although they were on the floor, so I had to kneel down to look through the boxes. But I did find a number of things. In fact, it was one of these cases where you think, you're not going to find anything. And then you start flipping through and you almost instantly find something that you're interested in. And in this case, it was some issues of Legion of Superheroes. I found basically the issues to fill out the run. I have from, I think, 283 up to 294. And I also have 298. And so I found the rest of the issues up through 300. So 295 to 297 and 299 to 300. So I now have, not quite 20 issue run of Legion of Superheroes. And they had more. They may have had all the way up to the point where that original run, the 1980 run of Legion of Superheroes, ended and was retitled as Tales of the Legion. And then they started the 1984 series of Legion of Superheroes, which was the Baxter series. But at first I started to pull some of them out, and I was like, no, I've got to cut this off somewhere, and 300 seemed like a good place to cut it off. So there was 5 issues of that I bought. I kept looking. I ran across another romance comic, Young Love number 122, which was a DC comic. It was 50 cents. I don't have it right in front of me. Wait a minute. Yes, I do. I can pull this out, and I can tell you what year it's from. It wasn't even bagged and boarded. It's not in the best of shape, but it was only 50 cents, so I figured, what the heck, why not? Yeah, it's not in the best, and it had some kind of funny stuff on the cover. The New Young Love, 50 cents, number 122, November of 1976. And there's some crayon markings, it looks like, on the inside. But the cover says, "You can edit this magazine, details inside." And then the picture on the cover is a young lady slapping a man, saying, "You're just like all the others, just playing games, but I know the truth. There's no such thing as love." And her mother, or maybe it's her grandmother, I'm not sure, is behind her with a very shocked look on her face. But, so I picked this up. 50 cents. This must have been like a double-sized issue, and it kind of does look like a double, although it doesn't say, because DC Comics in 76 were not 50 cents. I think they were still either 35 or 40 cents at that time. Maybe even 25 or 30. Can't remember all the iterations of the prices for DC Comics at that time. Let's see, who did the art on this first story? Let's see if there's, I would think at this point that they would have the credits. Yes, pencils Rick Estrada, inks Tony DeZuniga. Well, that's the first story. I'm not sure about I'm not sure if this is all one story, and I'm not sure exactly how this, "You can edit this magazine, details inside." Whether maybe that was they were searching for a new editor. Maybe that's what that's an indication of. That's not how I read it initially. So, let's see. So there was the Legion of Superheroes issues. There was Young Love. I also picked up an issue of the Shadow Strikes number 3. I have like 3 issues, I think, or 4 issues at home, and I've heard that the first 15 is a pretty good run, and so I've been trying to fill that out. So this is just one more in that run, but I'm still missing probably more than half of those first 15 issues. I definitely have the first 3 at this point. I think I also have like 7 and 8, and I'm not entirely sure how that came to be, that I have these issues but not those issues, or why there's a gap there. And the only other thing I picked up, I found they had quite a few issues of Marvel Comic Presents, including, and I didn't check to see if they had all of it, but I bought the first 5 issues of the Black Panther run by Don McGregor and Gene Colan. I heard about this on Comic Geek Speak when they did their spotlight on Black Panther. This sounded like one of the runs that is definitely worth reading. That and the Don McGregor run in Jungle Action, I believe it is, and then the Kirby run is the other one. Well, that one, and also the Christopher Priest is the other run, which is much more recent than those other 3 runs. Although, actually, the Marvel Comics Presents run would have been from the late 1980s, I think, or maybe 1990. Maybe it was the early 1990s. I'm not sure exactly when Marvel Comics Presents run began. So that was 12 comic books, 50 cents a piece, so it was $6. I thought that was a very good deal. I was thinking of going back over to the Yo publishing table and buying one of their books. I passed by there at one point, Craig Yo was there. He was talking to somebody else. I kind of looked at their books kind of quickly, studied them a little bit, but I didn't. I needed to go to a panel, so I didn't stick around. The second and final panel that I went to was the Bitch Planet panel, and this is a book that's done by Kelly Sue DeConnick and Valentine DeLandro, and I've heard her interviewed on Word Balloon about this. I think I've also heard her interviewed on other shows. I don't really know a lot about the book. You know what? I'm going to talk about this a little later. I'm getting ready to take off. Actually, there was one more thing I did, but not at the convention, and that's I got back to my car around 2:35, 2:40, and I took out the food, and I had a pita full of chicken and cucumbers and tomatoes, which was pretty good, although the cucumbers had gotten a bit freezer burned. So at this point, I'm getting ready to take off. I am going to do another recording for the two panels that I went to. But I'm getting ready to leave Charlotte. It is about 3:30, 3:40 right now. So I probably won't be home till midnight, 1 in the morning, I'm guessing, based on past experience. I think my first stop is going to be somewhere around Greensboro. I'm not planning to make any recordings about the drive probably until tomorrow, but I'll make some notes so that I can talk about that a little bit, and that will also be part of this same episode, hopefully. So that's it from Charlotte for now, and I'm heading home. Oh, and I guess the other thing I wanted to say was that I feel as if I had a pretty good time. I really enjoyed myself, and I think in years past it felt like a real letdown when I was leaving. I don't feel let down. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go home. I'm not as tired as I thought I would be at this point. I'm not sure if I'll be wide awake for the whole drive home, but I think I can make it. And based on this experience this year, I want to come back again next year. I always take it on a kind of, we'll see, how things go. And I guess I should see how I feel when I get home, or how I feel tomorrow morning when I maybe do another recording. But so that's it from Charlotte but that's not it for HeroesCon 2016. The first panel that I went to today was the crime panel. This was at noon. There was 6 people on the panel if you count the moderator. The moderator was the same guy who moderated the Ren and Stimpy panel on Friday, and that's Joe Rock. I believe that's how he pronounces it, or how he pronounced it. R-A-U-C-H or S-C-H? Hold on, I'm going to check the program. C-H, R-A-U-C-H. And the other members of the panel were all people who'd worked on crime comics. There was 2 people who worked on a comic called High Crimes. One was the writer, the other the artist, and they were Christopher Sabella, the writer, and Ibrahim Mustafa, the artist. There was also Josh Greenwood, who, among other things, worked on Stumptown with Greg Rucka. And there was also John Lees, I'm not really familiar with most of these names, but he's definitely not American. At first I thought he was Irish, but then he said something about returning to Glasgow, which is in Scotland, so I assume he's Scots then, not Irish. And the last member of the panel was Rich Tommaso, who's the only one that I've actually read any work from, or that I know that I've read any work from. And he did the book, his current work is called Dark Carter, and there was another book, a mini comic that he was putting out, which was, I believe he originally did as a web comic and then produced it. And I honestly, I have some issues at home. I read like the first one that I think I bought 2 years ago, and then I bought like another issue or 2 from him last year, and I don't think I ever got around to reading them, but I did enjoy what I read. Otherwise I wouldn't have gone back to buy more from him last year. So for the most part, this panel was a Q&A with first the moderator asking questions of the panelists, and then they took a number of questions from the audience, and there was quite a few questions from the audience. I I had ideas for a couple questions, but they kind of were just offshoots of questions that other people had asked. And there seemed to be a lot of questions from the audience, so I didn't bother to ask any. So here are some of the questions they asked with some of the answers, but I'm not going to go into too much detail as to who said what. In fact, I didn't even record who said what in my notes, although I might remember some of the authors of some of the comments. So the first question was, what makes a good crime comic? And some of the answers that were given were the characters, the intention or the mental state, presumably, of the characters, the choices that people are presented with. At least one person talked about what drives people to make poor decisions, and the fact that it's easy to put yourself in, quite often it's easy to put yourself in the shoes of the person telling the story, and that to imagine what would I do in this situation. The next question was, what makes a good character? And I think there was a fair amount of consensus here, although they came at it from some interesting angles. The first thing that was mentioned was flaws. What's wrong with the characters? Everybody has a flaw, and this kind of gets back to the idea of tragedy. That a tragic character is a character who has a flaw, who can't do the right thing because of something. They may know what the right thing is, but they can't do the right thing because of something that inhibits them or that prevents them from being a good person, or being a good person when they need to be a good person, or a better person. Somebody else talked about despicable characters with redeeming flaws, and somebody cited the example of The Punisher, specifically in the Daredevil Netflix Season 2. But I think there's plenty of other probably good examples of people, of characters from books and from movies and from comic books who start off as being somebody very dark and evil, and then you start to see things that make you want to root for them. And one character's name who came up in this, who I certainly can agree with, is the character of Lincoln Red Crow from Scalped. I haven't finished reading Scalped, but I'm 80% of the way through it, and you can definitely see he starts off as somebody very dark and very evil, and then you start Jason Aaron and I'm forgetting the name of the artist, R.M. Guerra, certainly give you a much better impression of who he is and what his background is, because that whole book is about not just what's happening in the present, but what happened, I think it's 30 or 40 or maybe even 50 years before. One thing that Rich Tommaso mentioned is that he needs there to be something real about the character. He needs something that he can relate to, something that he knows from somebody, something from the real world, a real person. He wasn't saying that the characters in stories are modeled, are direct, representations of people he knows, but that there has to be something there that he can see in a real person, I think. The next question was, how important is it to establish a sense of place, and how do you create it? And in the discussion that followed that question, there came up that in some cases places can almost be a main character, and I can't remember the examples they cited. There was one that had something to do with a comic book that takes place on a space station, and there was another one that takes place at Everest. I think that's High Crimes. The question that followed that was, what informs your sense of pacing in terms of visual storytelling? How do you speed up or slow down the story through the images? And I didn't take any notes on that. I thought it was interesting, but they didn't go into it in too much depth. It was an interesting question. But there was a lot of interesting information that was presented in this panel. And But I'm going to go on with these questions. And then they started to get some questions from the audience. The first one was, what are your influences in terms of crime storytelling? They cited a number of things. I didn't write any of them down. Well, no, I didn't write any of them down. I think they were the standard sort of things that you would think of. As always, I recorded this panel, and you can listen to this panel and hear what their answers were. I was a little surprised or I was a little disappointed maybe, that all of their answers seemed to be, or I think almost all of their answers seem to be crime stories as influences, and not other sorts of stories that might have influenced them in their writing of crime comics. There was a question from an audience member about how much does law enforcement play into the way you craft a story, and I wondered if the person asking the question works in law enforcement, although he didn't say whether he did or didn't, and nobody asked him if he did. But the responses seemed to be that that they didn't have that much interest unless the police officers were flawed characters. Because the first responses seemed to indicate that they thought of the cops as, and they didn't put it this way exactly, but that they thought of the cops as being too rigid, too one-dimensional is the way I would put it. And so they weren't as fully fleshed out. And in order to be fully fleshed out, that you really need you need some flaws, because everybody has flaws. Everybody has failings, shortcomings. The next person asked a question, well, he asked a question, then he asked a follow-up question. The first question was, how does non-physical assets affect crime stories? And I think what he was getting at was that quite often, especially in comic books and in movies, there's a lot made of the way the crime is portrayed happening, the heist, that sort of thing. And if what you're stealing is something not physical, like data, information, money, stealing money electronically, then what is there? Then how do you represent that? And one of the responses, and I don't think this was the first response, but one of the responses was that the money or whatever it is, that's the physical objects that are being stolen, are really a MacGuffin. I mean, the story is really about the choices that the mental state of the character, the choices that the main characters are making, and how they come to do what they do. I mean, why they're doing what they're doing, and I would throw in, and I don't recall anybody saying this, but I think also probably the conflicts among the characters, if you think of a movie like, say, Reservoir Dogs. The follow-up question was, I think I kind of jumped the gun there. The follow-up question was, how does it impact the visual presentation of the crime? And then they got into a little bit of discussion of movies like Sneakers and Hackers, and how they were kind of dated by the way that they presented internet crimes back in this would have been like the mid-90s, as compared to, what we know about internet crimes today and how they're presented today. There was a question about Nightcrawler, not the superhero, not the X-Men, but the movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, which I have seen and is quite good. I didn't catch the question exactly. I wasn't sure if the person was making some sort of a statement about it or was asking them about it. So I'm not even sure if that will come out clearly in the recording what the question was. But they did offer some opinions about Nightcrawler. There was a question. I'm not sure if this is from the audience or from the moderator about who your favorite crime characters are. And I have two notes here that I recorded on that. One of the guys talked about a character named Phineas Poe, and I believe it's from a novel, not from a comic book. And I think the same person also mentioned The Mantle, and I think that might be a comic book. And so those are a couple things that I'm going to look up. But once again, if you want more details on that, listen to the recording, because he does talk a little bit about who Phineas Poe is and the situation that he gets himself into. But usually I think their favorite characters are, once again, people who are flawed, people who get themselves into these, weirdo situations and then have to work their way out, and not just work their way out, but part of it is working almost against themselves sometimes, because their own desires kind of dig them into these holes. Desires, wants, needs. One of the final questions was, or the next to last question that I wrote down. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. I've got three more questions here. How do you prefer to portray violence? Should it be gritty? Should it be stylized? And I think the general there was some discussion of that, and I think the general consensus was that they prefer it, that less can definitely be more in cases like this. That sometimes the best way to show violence in a situation like this is to show it on the faces of the characters, of characters who are seeing the violence, or even the characters who are committing the violence, or to show it in silhouette, or to go all the way up to the point where the violence is committed, and then shift scene, or not show the violence. And I certainly agree with that. I think there's a lot to be said for that. The next to last question was, what makes crime compelling? And what I wrote down is, what they said is that anyone, and this is a recurring theme throughout this, is that anybody could do it. That it's all about making bad decisions, and there's definitely a universality of it. And it's about the shitty stuff that people do to one another. And I don't think anybody put it this way, but you could compare it to like watching a train wreck. You can't take your eyes off the disaster that's happening in front of you. And I think that's and it's not just that it's a disaster, but it's that people have. It's not just something that's happening to people. It's happening because of the choices they've made, the decisions they've made. And then the final question, and I didn't write down any answers but there were some very funny comments that in response to this question. That is, what's the worst crime you ever committed? And if you want to hear what they had to say, you should listen to my recording of the panel, which will be posted soon. The second panel that I went to today, which was basically the last thing that I did at the convention today, was I went to the Bitch Planet panel. This was run by Kelly Sue DeConnick, and she ran the show, and she had other people who worked with her on this. Hold on, let me grab the program guide. She had Valentine DeLandro and Lawrence Sankovich and Kit Cox, all of whom have contributed to this comic book. This panel did not turn out to be what I hoped it would be. I was hoping for something, and I should have just. I was taking a chance in going to this panel. There were other panels that I could have gone to that probably would have been more in my vein, but I felt like I needed to take a chance and try something a little different. I have not read the Bitch Planet comic book. I think only 7 issues have come out to date. I believe issue 8 is about to come out, or probably will be by the time this episode has been released. This panel, though, was really designed for people who were fans of the comic book. It was not an entry point for people who were unfamiliar with the comic. There was a lot of cheering and it was more like an announcement panel, or a press panel. It was basically a fan event panel in that it was for people who were already fans of this. It was not one of the nerdy, informative panels that you might get, like the romance comics panel that I went to yesterday. It was nothing like that. It was not the sort of thing that educated you. It was more of a gathering for people who were fans of this. And in that respect, I definitely felt out of place. I'm still interested in giving the comic book a try. I'm not sure if I'll like it or not. But for the most part, the panel consisted of, they did introductions, and I actually got in there a little late, so I was just missing part of the introductions. There were some announcements about things like back matter and clothing they're going to have to offer. And then there was a Q&A after that. They talked about, there was questions about apparently that there's going to be some transgender characters introduced to the comic book soon. And there's some questions from audience members about what sort of, how they're being portrayed. And Kelly Sue DeConnick was very... she was very wordy in some ways. I mean, she definitely felt like being a straight white woman that she had to tread carefully. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it, but that she had to, maybe it is the right way to put it, but she had to consult people who had a much better understanding of what it means to be transgender, and so she talked a little bit about that. And there was a few other questions. I'm not sure if I'm going to release this panel, my recording of this panel. First off, I'm not sure how good it came out. It's not the same sort of panel as the others. I was not sitting in the front row because I arrived late, and there was basically no space in the front row. It wasn't packed, but the first few rows were fairly crowded. I don't consider it to be a mistake that I went to it. It just didn't work out exactly the way that I wanted it to. I hope that it would be something that would give me a better idea of what the comic book was about. And I guess in some ways it did give me a better idea of what the comic book was about, but I may as well have listened to her talking about it or read reviews online if that's what I wanted. I definitely felt like it wasn't, I was a bit of an outsider there. I mean, it was mostly women in the audience, and it was also mostly fans in the audience of this comic book. It was not people like me. I didn't get the impression it was people like me. And then towards the end of the panel, she wanted to play some games, and so she suggested, and at that point they had already used up the full hour, but the room wasn't going to be used again that day. So she suggested that anybody who wanted to join in these games could come back into one corner of the room, and they'd form a big circle and play these games. And at that point, I was getting hungry, among other things, and I wanted to get back to my car and eat. And so I decided to take off. I wasn't the only one. And so it was probably my least favorite panel of the group, but I don't think it was a bad panel. I just don't think it was I don't think it was a good panel for me. I wasn't a good fit for that panel. Heroes Con is over, and I am back home. I've been home for about 12 hours now. I left Charlotte at about 3:45 yesterday afternoon. I drove all the way to Danville, Virginia, which is just across the line it's right near the North Carolina-Virginia border. And I stopped at a place I've stopped at before, Pilot Travel Center, which is just off of Route 29. And I ate some more there, had some more of the chicken and tomatoes and cucumbers and pita bread. And at that point, I also took a bathroom break. I also bought some water, and then I did some recording. I recorded what you probably will be hearing. No, what you probably have already heard at this point. I'm not sure which order I'm going to put these things in, but I recorded the bits where I was talking about the two panels that I went to on Sunday, the third day of Heroes Con. So I was there for almost an hour. I didn't leave Danville till 6:55. I'd been there about 50 minutes at that point. And I drove straight through to Ruckersville, Virginia, which is about 15 miles north of Charlottesville. I had enough gas to make it all that way. I wasn't sure at first if I would, but then looking at the gas meter, and this car is fancy enough that the gas meter actually told you how many miles you had left, and so I was able to keep a good eye on that, and I probably made it with about 20 miles to spare, 30 miles to spare, something like that. And I stopped at a Sheetz there in Ruckersville, which is right on Route 29, another place that I've stopped before in the past. I put gas in the car, of course. Took another bathroom break. I bought and ate an ice cream sandwich. And as I was eating that, one of my brothers called, my youngest brother called, and we talked for a little while about how the trip went. And before the conversation ended, I decided to pull out and get back on the road. And so we were talking while I was driving on the road as well, using, of course, a hands-free device. And so that was basically my last intermediate stop along the way. And I drove the rest of the way from Ruckersville, leaving there at 9:45, back to home. And I got home at about 11:50. So I was driving. Well, it took me about 8 hours to get home. And my estimate is that there was a little under 7 hours of driving in that, because it was about 8 hours, and I was stopped for a total of about an hour and 15 minutes. So I was very tired by the time I got home. The last 20 miles or so were very tough. I was slapping myself in the face, rolling down the window, doing anything I could to keep myself awake and alert, because I was really getting tired. I really should have found a gas station, pulled over, and just sat there, got out of the car, walked around, just, because, I don't know, it's just draining, and something about driving at night also, especially, so, but I made it in one piece, no accidents, no mishaps, no near mishaps. I did manage to, I think it was at Danville, I managed to hit the brake once again, thinking it was the clutch, but I think that's the only time I did it. And that was just as I was pulling into the parking spot there, so I wasn't moving very fast at all at that point. So I got home at 11:50. I was in bed by 12:30, and then I got up around 6:30 and, did the usual stuff, showered, had breakfast, got dressed. And then I drove the rental car back over to the place where I rented it from, and then took the metro most of the way home, and then walked the last mile and a half or so. And so that's it. That's it for the trip. I haven't done a thorough analysis of how much I spent, but I believe I spent considerably less than I did in prior years. I think I spent about $35 on comic books, on, individual comic books, another 35 or close to it on trades. I think I just bought 2 trades. And I had spent already $85? I think it was $85 for those 2 commissions, $85 total for those 2 commissions I got from Chris Schweitzer and Joey Weiser. And I also bought a print, which I think I mentioned in the episode where I talked about the first day, the Samurai Jack print. And I think that was another $10. And I think that was about the extent of what I spent, at the show itself. Oh, and then I also bought the T-shirt, the Heroes Con T-shirt, the Brian Stelfreeze shirt with the Black Panther on it, which was another $25. But still, when you add all that up, it's pretty sure that's less than $150. May even be just over $100 now that I think about it. Then there's the hotel costs and the rental car and meals, although I didn't eat out. So it was probably once I add everything up, it will probably be my least expensive Heroes Con to date. I've spent over $400 on art alone in prior years, and I spent under $100 this year. So I think I took more cash than I ended up spending. I came home with quite a bit of cash that I'd been going to ATMs before I left, and I took a few $100s in cash with me, and I came home with some of it, which is fine by me, because there's things I wish I'd bought at the same time, things to read. I just have so much stuff to read. I really don't need to, and I want to be nice to some of these people, and at the same time, I don't think that buying their stuff is the only way to show that you appreciate them and you appreciate the work they do and you appreciate the fact that they're out there creating things. And that's part of it, sometimes, because quite often when I buy things, some things I will read fairly quickly, but most of them I do not. Most of them it takes me quite a while to get around to reading them. They will sit, and some of them, I've got stuff I bought at Heroes Con last year that I still haven't read. I've got stuff that I bought at Appleseed Con last year and Baltimore Comic Con last year that I haven't read yet. I have stuff that I bought at those conventions that I have read as well. But, so my experience was very good at Heroes Con this year. I really had a lot of fun. My restaurant experiences were all good. The panel experiences were all good. The last one was it was a bit of a chance I was taking there. It didn't work out, but on the other hand, it made it a little easier to leave at the end of that panel to leave the convention because it wasn't a great experience, and I didn't really, I didn't feel the pull to continue experiencing things. And you gotta, you just gotta break it off at some point. And I have, an 8-hour drive home from Charlotte, so I can't be dilly-dallying around too much. But overall, it was a great experience. I'm definitely planning on going again next year. Next year's, I think I've got they've got the ad already. Next year it is here it is, June 16th to 18th of 2017. So I'm looking forward to that. And who knows? Last year I reserved my hotel room months in advance. I think more than 9 months in advance I reserved my hotel room. Who knows? Maybe by the end of the summer I will have done that again. And the hotel I stayed at was very nice. There was 2 drawbacks. One is that it was not close to the downtown area. It was a good 25 minutes to a half-hour drive to downtown. Although there's plenty of parking in the downtown that's not that expensive if you look around. And, by my standards, and I live in a city where the parking is ridiculously expensive, where it's easy to spend $25 to $35 for a day of parking. So, and if you can find it for under, for $15 for the day, you're doing good. I think that's probably unusual where I live, but at least in the city itself, in the downtown area, and in the more urban areas, the areas where, you get office buildings and things like that. But so that's the one drawback. The other drawback is that they were renovating this year, and it was a little dilapidated. It wasn't dilapidated. It's just there was, equipment and stuff around. There was places. At one point I tried to go up a flight of stairs, and I couldn't go up because they had it roped off, and I had to go around and find another flight of stairs to go up because it was a 3-story hotel. I didn't feel like waiting for the elevator. And I was staying on the second floor, so I only had to go up 1 flight of stairs. But the room was very nice. They did a great job. It did not feel... Yeah, there was a little bit of noise. There were some kids staying there. There was, I think, a high school something team, some athletic team was there on Saturday morning when I went down for breakfast. But, they were all polite. It wasn't like they were being rowdy or anything like that. And... there were some families with little kids, and there was a pool there. I didn't go in because, well, A, I didn't bring a bathing suit, and B, there was lots of kids running around in the pool, and it just didn't. I didn't need to. I kept myself busy throughout the weekend while I was in Charlotte. I really didn't have any time to spare. I was either at the convention doing things, at panels, digging through back issue bins, or I was driving back to the hotel, going out to get a meal to eat. I stayed very busy. There really wasn't much time to spare, and I didn't feel the need to stay out all night. I had a good time. I had a very good time, and I'm looking forward to next year's Heroes Con. Already, who knows who will be there? I'm sure I'll see some of the same faces, but I'm definitely looking forward to what will be hopefully my 6th Heroes Con in 7 years in 2017. That's it for episode 116 of Dave Talks Comics, but my coverage of Heroes Con 2016 isn't over just yet. I made recordings of the panels I went to. I will be posting those recordings to this feed and to the Dave Talks Comics website in the near future. In addition to the Dave Talks Comics website, davetalkscomics.com, this podcast can also be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook. If you have comments or questions, I can be reached at davetalkscomics@gmail.com, on Twitter @DaveTalksComics, or leave a comment on my website. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.